Welcome to Adventure Thinking, an intimate series of live video podcasts that explores the mindset born from challenge, adversity, and living a life of no regrets. I'm Jonesy, your host, and for the past 20 years, I have been lucky to have embarked on some crazy expeditions.
And I'm Lauren, your other host, and I haven't.
And returned transformed, with some pretty epic tales to share.
I'm more of an accidental adventurer.
You just start to question why you're doing it.
Each week, I'll be bringing adventure stories
We'll be bringing?
and mindsets down from the proverbial mountaintop as we dive into the hearts and minds of some of the world's greatest adventurers. These are people that have achieved truly phenomenal undertakings against all odds and have returned better for it. So, do you want to live more adventurously? This is Adventure Thinking.
All right, Lauren, how are we today?
Doing good. Number 16. Episode number 16.
It is.
I can't believe it.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's out of control.
Does that mean we're podcasters now?
No, I don't think I'll ever be anything. I think I'm just this guy that's trying to fuddle through life a little bit, to tell the truth. But no, it feels good. We're getting some
I think we're garage casters, because here we are in the garage again.
We're garage casting. Lauren's going to flip over in a second because I just don't like the way you're looking, Lauren. There we go.
Whoa.
Oh, that's wrong.
Whoa.
Actually, no, don't worry about it. Ignore me. But how's this last week been? What's been going on, Lauren? Anything been happening that's been fun, exciting, or bad, or sad?
We're just in the life...
Oh, there we go. That's better.
We're just in the life moment of moving with two kids. So we are packing up our place in Sydney for a little while, and we are heading down to Tasmania to a 250 hectare vineyard and working sheep farm. So we're having a sea change, and with that comes packing and a bit of sadness, saying goodbye to the life that we knew, with some excitedness to see what's to come. How are you feeling?
That's a little bit of a porky pie. I'm going to call you on that because it's not a 250 hectare vineyard.
It's a small vineyard, but on a 250 hectare property.
Because that'd be a huge vineyard. Yeah. So a lot of people have been asking us, are you guys going to be able to, suffer through quarantining down in Tassie? And I think, you know what? I think we've got enough space. I think we'll be okay. So yeah, we'll get there.
Considering we've been doing it in quarantine over the summer in a 2-bedroom apartment, I think we can handle that, hopefully.
Well, to everyone who's joined us, there's 8 people online at the moment so far, and the numbers will build as we go on. Thank you for joining, because we have got a pretty phenomenal guest. Can I run away with this, Lauren?
Yes, go.
Okay.
Intro Lisa. She's amazing.
This is super cool. I was actually asking Lauren a little while ago. I can't remember how we met Lisa for the first time.
I think I met her at She Went Wild right when we got out of the Outback. But you've known her for longer.
I'm going to blame Dad Brain because I'm trying to remember the exact moment, but I've just always been in awe of Lisa and just what she's been up to and just how cool she is. She's a really fantastic, powerful, amazing human being and just really, really down to earth, which is epic, especially when you have such a large body of work in the, I suppose, sailing sphere. But I don't think she's, you can classify her as just a sailor because she's got other thoughts and plans on the horizons, She's not a one-trick pony. But Lisa. Okay, I'm going to jump into a bit of detail behind her to give you a bit of a picture of her background. So Lisa actually studied a Bachelor of Education and a Bachelor of Visual Arts, so not really quite sailing. But she was hostessing on a sailing boat in the Whitsundays, and she discovered that she loved it and she wanted more. She read books about, like from the likes of Kay Cotty, stories of Sir Robert Knox Johnson and Jessie Martin, and she decided to gather the skills to become a solo sailor herself. In 2011-12, she actually went around the world as part of the Clipper Round the World Yacht Race. And from there, she just went bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm not going to go into all the, Yacht Master, Offshore Master Class 5, skipper tickets and all this stuff that she's got. But she's a legit sailor. But she decided to go off in 2017. And after 3.5 years of preparation and planning, sail solo and non-stop and unassisted around Antarctica. That was the goal, with the secondary goal of breaking the current record of 102 days to sail around Antarctica. Now we're talking hectic cold, down in the depths of the Southern Ocean.
Slightly different than the Whitsundays. A
little bit different. I don't know how you go from the Whitsundays down to the Southern Ocean.
So the Whitsundays, for people that are not from Australia, is the Great Barrier Reef. So picture idyllic, for the most part, turquoise waters. So she started there and has progressed to...
And there's a lot of tourists running around that are baked quite nice, sort of lobster red, a little bit drunk, wandering around the Whitsundays a bit. But so that's the Whitsundays. But 72 days into her solo voyage and 3/4 of the way around Antarctica, Lisa suffered a dramatic and life-threatening dismasting, I should say, in storm conditions, more than 1,000 nautical miles from land. Now, Lisa saved her yacht and was rendered some fuel from a passing container ship, which has a lot of drama to it itself, and she'll get into that, built a jury rig and motor sailed into Cape Town. Now, 2 months later, she restarted her voyage and continued from where she demasted and made history finally on July 25th of that year to become the first woman to sail solo and unassisted around Antarctica with one stop. Now, she has gone off and done other things. She sailed around Australia, set a record doing that in itself in 2017. Actually, no, 2018, I believe it was. And she has done multiple Sydney Hobarts, and she's got another, I think, idea beckoning on the horizon that I can't wait to dive into as well. So to give you a bit of a flavour of what Lisa's all about, here's a little snippet from her upcoming documentary on her trip around Antarctica. Have a watch of this. It's epic.
When you're out there on your own, there's nobody else you can rely on. You're so far from help. From what I could tell, and my meteorologist and my other advisors could tell, the swell was going to be a little bit bigger and the storms were going to be more frequent. I thought I'd ticked every box. I'd done everything I could possibly do to make it safer, but it didn't change the fact that I was still thrown in that life or death situation. Everything was like mounting up. And after 5 days of just extreme sleep deprivation, I just felt like I couldn't keep going. I felt like the world was telling me not to go, and I started listening to those doubters, and I started listening to the naysayers that were saying, don't go, you can't do it.
I'm so close to home.
I have to step up, I have to figure out a way, I have to make it work.
Cabin's been demolished because I've just been ripping stuff apart. I just can't go through it again.
If you haven't prepared for something, if you haven't thought about all the risk, if you haven't thought about all the scenarios you might encounter, then you're not going to succeed out there.
Ooh, Ice Maiden! I've got all the chills!
Hi, Lisa. Welcome to the show.
How are ya?
Yeah, good. That was an awesome intro, by the way.
Was it? I reckon I prattle on too much. I mean, I could keep prattling on it. Do you want me to keep on going?
One thing I want to add, though, Lisa, is the thing I love most about you is your storytelling ability. I'm not a crier. Justin cries more than I do. I didn't even cry during the birth of our kids, but no. Justin did.
Cold, tiny heart she has. Tiny heart.
But I did shed a tear, and so did the person I was with, Nina James, if you're watching. When we came and watched you, I don't know if you remember, but the Ocean Festival. So your ability to not only do these crazy things, but to share the story is the reason I really was excited to have you on the podcast today. Because so few people get to hear your story compared to, I think, the people that would get something out of it. And when I heard you talk about how you basically faced a demasting, which I'm not a sailor. I hope to be a sailor one day. But a demasting is your mast like literally broke off your boat, which, for anybody out there who's a sailor, I'm sure that they can go into that. But really for anybody who isn't, that's not a good thing.
No,
yeah, that's a bad thing.
It's not
something
good,
that happens often, I don't think. That's probably one of the worst things that could happen. So I can't wait to hear you. I was so excited when you chose your theme for today, which is fear.
Oh, I forgot to mention that, didn't I? Whoops.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Thanks,
But that's okay.
Thanks, Lauren.
That's why I'm here. We're both.
Keep me on track. Thank you.
But fear and your relationship with fear, because being down in Antarctica, or traveling solo, circumventing solo, even though you had a team, you were alone. Nobody could rescue you. You're in a huge storm and your mask snaps off. I can't think of a more scary position to be in personally, emotionally, physically. You're exhausted. I can't wait to hear it. So should we jump into, Lisa, are you happy to jump into a bit of a story around that moment? Because it's a pretty unique one.
Yeah, well, I guess for me, I wanted to actually start a little earlier in the timeline. When I first started sailing, like you said, I was very green. I'd been sailing 7.5 years when the idea was born that I was going to go and sail solo around Antarctica. And I think fear is like an interesting kind of construct because it can stop us from following our hearts or our dreams. And for me, one of the first moments where I really felt that I had to push past, self-doubt and fear was to actually commit to the project itself and know within my heart and within my soul that it's something that I could achieve, and sort of try and rationalize that in my mind. Like, how do you go from never sailing before 7 years later to trying to sail solo around Antarctica? Like, it's this huge leap forward in a career path in sailing. And for me, the Southern Ocean was always just this fascinating place. But when I had raced around the world with the Clipper race, I'd seen the storms in the Southern Ocean, and I'd seen, 40-foot waves and just these incredible seascapes that are just so ferocious and monstrous. But you can survive inside them and you can thrive inside them on a tiny little boat. And doing that with crew was an epic challenge. And then to try and think about staying and living and surviving in that ocean on my own, initially I thought absolutely no way, because there was no way that I was capable of something like that. I didn't believe in myself enough. I had a very healthy respect for how dangerous the Southern Ocean can be, and I didn't really think of getting past it. But after several months, that kind of decision sort of kept niggling at me, and I kept constantly trying to rationalize in my mind, well, there's this part of me that really, really wants to go and do Antarctica, but it's this super scary challenge, and it was going to be this huge time commitment, and it was going to be a life-changing sort of adventure to go on, and that was if I survived.
Yeah, and possibly life-threatening.
Yeah, pretty well on a daily basis.
Not to mention.
How do you go and do that? So for me, I think that was one of the first things that I identify as, fear, because you can't go and sail in the Southern Ocean and not be terrified of the challenge that you're going to go and encounter while you're down there. And I always sort of positioned Cape Horn as the most dangerous section of that voyage. So in my mind, I'd rationalized it where I was always, if I can get past Cape Horn, then I'll be okay. And so that was always sort of like the pinnacle. And Cape Horn is one of the most dangerous continents because it's points of land, because it's right next to Antarctica, and it's got this small gap between Cape Horn and the Antarctic Peninsula, which is only 500 miles wide. And I think, Justin, there's some photos of this.
Yep.
So this gap that you have, the storms of the Southern Ocean kind of roll around the whole bottom of the planet, and there's no landmass anywhere to break them up except for that little gap right there. And for me, I unfortunately, as you can see from that image, was going to be passing Cape Horn in this huge storm, and I actually nicknamed it the mother of all storms because it was just so much bigger than any other storm.
Hold on 1 second. I think there we go. I think that's a bit. I think the slides are showing the wrong way around. There we go. That's better. I was showing the back end of the slides, not the front end of the slides. So sorry. Continue.
So there's that gap, and this is a group file image of the storm that I was going to encounter in 48 hours time, right when I rounded Cape Horn. So coming down the coastline of Chile and sailing towards this mythical place called Cape Horn, which is basically just a big rock in the middle of the ocean. But it's a rock that's so many sailors have come undone on, and it's cost a lot of people their lives sailing around that point of the ocean. And to have this big storm, I just had this kind of consistent sinking feeling in my stomach, like I've just got to get through Cape Horn. I've just got to get through Cape Horn. And it was this endless cycle of massive seas and storms. And Justin, you're welcome to just click through some of those photos there that just show the size of the swell rounding Cape Horn. And well, there's that rock. And as I was going around, I was in these sort of 10-meter breaking seas and just insane conditions. And the whole time I was continually thinking, okay, just get around Cape Horn, just get around Cape Horn. This is going to be the peak of the fear factor for me for this whole voyage, when actually it became second to the demasting, so to speak, because the demasting ended up becoming such a bigger challenge for me than rounding Cape Horn in these conditions. But and all my preparation and all my planning leading up to this trip, this was the fear factor for me. Knowing that I could get past Cape Horn and get around this piece of land and then get north again was like the biggest sort of challenge. You want to click over to the next slide there, Justin?
Yeah, I'm just trying to do that. There we go.
There we go. So that just shows in that one photo, I was on the bow of the boat rounding Cape Horn, and that massive wave came. And actually, at this point, I was already under drogue, which I, to be honest, think is the only reason I survived going around Cape Horn. And these 10-meter waves would just slam into the boat and pick you up like you weighed nothing and just throw you down the face of, you know, a wall of complete water. And
Lisa, can I ask you to just explain what a drogue is? Because there are some people out there that probably don't know what that is.
Like me.
No, good spot. So a drogue is basically like a sea anchor. It's set on a bridle at the back of the boat, and it runs out. And for me, I had what we call the Jordan Series drogue, which was 150 little baby parachutes, basically. And you strip it out the back of the boat, and it hooks into the water and creates drag. And with the bridle at the back, it actually stops you getting knocked sideways by a wave. And that's the most dangerous point. If you get caught beam on to a wave or sideways to a wave, then the next wave can hit you and actually roll you over. So the drogue's design, or by design of the drogue, is to stop that effect taking place. But it doesn't take away the punishing effect of the wave slamming into the side of the boat. So this was the one and only time I actually used the drogue throughout the trip. But I was in bigger seas later on, but I was in deeper water. So the sort of wave structure is slightly different in deeper water, so it was a bit easier to manage. But yeah, it was quite a stressful section of the voyage. And for me, once I got clear of Cape Horn and I was sailing out across the South Atlantic, I was kind of feeling like the biggest section of the challenge, or the biggest hurdle that I was likely to face, was going to be sort of achieved and done, and I was going to be okay. And then shortly after that, day 72, and I think if you click through another photo there, Justin, and then in a few seconds there's one more, day 72, it all went horribly wrong. As Lauren and Justin were saying, the mast just snapped. I had a piece of gear failure, and I woke up with this bang, and it was so loud. It sounded like a gun had gone off near my head. It was like that echoing after effect from the deafening loudness of the rigging breaking. And I was in bed at the time, and it was just getting on dark, and I was in a storm that was building through the night. And when the rigging failed, the whole mast, which is 22-meter long piece of metal, was unsupported. And so within a few seconds, the mast just came crashing down, and it was this deafening roar of like metal on metal, screeching and grinding and twisting, and the whole boat just shuddering and shaking. And at the time, I was at that little U-turn that you can see at the bottom there on that image. So I was 1,000 nautical miles from land and completely on my own. And for me, I know in my preparations, I had always said to myself that there's no guarantee of rescue on a voyage like this. In fact, it's almost a certainty that there won't be a rescue in time to help myself. So in all scenarios that I encounter while I'm doing this record, I need to be able to self-rescue and save myself in any conceivable scenario that I could dream up. And that, to me, was one way of sort of rationalizing my fear and harnessing that fear to be able to go and achieve this project. So when the mast came down, I had planned and prepared for a demasting, but there's only so much reading you can do on a topic before it actually has no more effect on you, and experiencing it and reading about it are completely different things. And experiencing it in freezing temperatures, completely isolated after 72 days of being completely on my own, it was something I would never want to repeat in my life, and it's something I'd never wish on my worst enemy, to go through an experience like this. You can see in that image there that the mast had actually snapped at deck level, and it had fallen over to the starboard side or the right-hand side of the boat and was dragging kind of half in the water and half on the deck of the boat. But what was happening was I was in 6 to 8 meter breaking seas, and I had sort of 30 to 45 knots of wind around at the time. And the wind and the waves were churning so badly that as the waves would pass underneath the boat, they would lift the mast up and sort of shove it up on the deck of the boat, and the next wave would kind of suck it off. And it was this incredibly dangerous seesaw motion that was occurring with so much force behind it that it was just snapping the ropes attached to the mast like they were, twigs. And for me on my boat, most of my ropes have a safe working load of 30 tons. So that's 60 tons of pressure getting applied with the force of the wave to be able to snap these lines. So it's just incredibly challenging conditions, and obviously always with an emergency they happen in the nighttime. So it was pitch black on deck. I just had the light of my head torch to see by, and when I watched the mast come crashing down and I felt that shudder through the boat, I just remember completely freezing and locking up. Like I couldn't move at that point. I was just frozen, because I was also in such disbelief that this was occurring and that this was happening at all, given the extensive level of preparation that had gone into the boat. And I'd replaced the rigging wire just before I left, so it was only 4 months old, and this was a scenario that simply shouldn't have happened. And as I froze on the deck, I was starting to run through all the horrible kind of scenarios that can occur out of a demasting, with the boat sinking and me getting ripped off the deck and washed overboard, or me getting injured trying to save the boat. And it was a couple seconds before I actually started reacting, and it was my preparation and my training that allowed me to react correctly and to make smart decisions going forward. And it ended up being 4 hours of crawling around on the deck of the boat, and waves would like wash you, and if you didn't get a hand on a rail or be able to grip onto something, you'd just be slammed into the other side of the boat. And all the railing was missing on the right hand side of the boat, and luckily the boat had positioned itself around that when I was getting washed by these waves, I was getting washed into the railing on the left hand side of the boat, sort of away from that gaping kind of hole. But it was a fight to survive. It was a do or die kind of evening, and there was this incredibly horrible, doubtful moment after I had managed to set free my aft piece of rigging wire, which is my backstay, and I'd gone up to the middle of the boat on the bow of the boat, and this is about 2 hours into the emergency. And I've got my inner forestay, which is a second piece of rigging wire on the inside of the boat. And then I have my forestay, which is a very forward piece of rigging wire that I needed to let free. And when I released the inner forestay piece of rigging wire, it had whipped around the deck of the boat kind of like a weapon, and was this huge weight behind it. So I was scrambling clear, trying to make sure I wasn't getting damaged or injured by this piece of whipping metal on the deck of the boat. And once I cleared that, I crawled to the very bow of the boat, and I looked forward to the forestay wire, and I could see that the way the mast and everything had snapped, it had fallen to the right-hand side, and it had actually blocked the fitting that I needed to release to split the rigging wire from the boat to be able to save the boat. And by this stage, I had a hole the size of a dinner plate in the side of the boat from the mast seesawing back and forth and effectively cutting me in half. And I felt this enormous pressure that time was running out. And when I looked at that piece of rigging wire, I realized that the only way to save the boat was to actually access it from the other side of the boat. And so that meant that I could either wedge an arm underneath the piece of broken wire and wrap my other arm around, but the minute I released it, it would probably break my arm or crack some ribs, and then I'd be useless to be able to save the rest of the boat. And the other option was to climb out on my bowsprit at the very front of the boat. And I think, Justin, there's another photo there of this. So that bowsprit is completely and utterly exposed to those 8-meter breaking seas that were coming through. The storm had been developing and getting worse as this scenario was occurring. And the way the mast had broken, it had torn my bowsprit almost completely off, my bow railing, and it buckled it to the right-hand side. So there was really nothing out there that I could hold on to. And I remember this being a really clear moment for me, battling fear. And I remember talking to my mum before I left and talking about, the possibility that I might not come home for.
Oh, I think we just lost Lisa.
We just lost Lisa.
We just lost Lisa. Oh, gee, like she's out there in the Southern Ocean right now. Hold on 1 second. We're going to try and get her back. So just bear with us. That's what you see in the back end now. So this is what happens in the back end. But let's try and call Lisa. So Lauren, just jump in there for a second. And hey, Lisa, are you there?
Yes.
We just lost you.
Someone
was calling. Okay. Who was that? Should we take the call?
Was it your mother?
Talking about it.
Yeah. Your mom's ears were burning.
Yeah, ESP, right?
So we totally lost you when you said that this was probably one of the moments that you had to battle fear the most, and you're going into the story that your mom was a story about your mom and some advice she had.
Okay. All right.
So for me, in my pre-departure, I had a conversation with Mum, and I basically said to her, don't be upset if I don't come home. Like, I had rationalized the fact that I was leaving on this incredible journey, that there is a possibility I might not come home, and that was an okay thing. And that was something I'd accepted as part of this journey, because to me, if I am doing this incredible journey, it was something that I could plan and manage 99% of the risks. And I was going out and I was living my dream, and I was achieving something that I dreamt of for years. So I was willing to go and take those risks. And for me, I felt that I could die in a car accident next week, and I didn't want to miss living my life and having these opportunities and having these grand adventures because of this, sort of fear that maybe I might not come home. So when I was in the situation and I had seen this bowsprit and I had to climb out onto this bowsprit, I realized quite quickly there's a very big difference between thinking that a journey like this could take you out and understanding or being faced with your immorality, because climbing up to the bow, like 2 meters of the front of the boat, and these waves were breaking clean across the boat. So every sort of 30 seconds I was getting completely engulfed in white water, and the whole boat's bucking, and it's worse than riding a Bronco or, just struggling to hold on, just even inside the rails on the deck of the boat. And I couldn't think that I would survive climbing outside on the bowsprit. But with the breakage of the boat and the way things were occurring, I knew that there was almost a certainty I wouldn't survive if I couldn't keep the boat floating. And the only way to keep the boat floating was to cut the mast free and get rid of it. And the only way to do that was to climb out on this bowsprit. So it was sort of one of those horrible situations where, you have to do it, and you have to push past that fear, and you have to get through it in order to actually have a chance of survival. And I remember thinking to myself at this point that I should update my shore team on what was going to happen. And I went below and I called Jeff, who was my shore manager at the time, and I just sort of updated him on where I was at with the project. And then I told him that I had to go out and climb out on this bowsprit to cut the rigging free. And he understood the risk associated with that. And the next thing I said to him was that if my personal location beacon or my EPIRB that was mounted on my life jacket, if that went off, it was because I'm in the water and there's no point sending a rescue. Because at that point, I'd been exposed in freezing conditions for over 2 hours. I was going into the onset of a hypothermia. I was losing the dexterity in my fingers. My brain was starting to go foggy, and I was really quickly running out of time. And if one of those waves took me off the deck of the boat, there was going to be no recovery from that. And I hung up the phone and I crawled back to the front of the boat. And I remember getting within like 2 meters of the bow and just completely locking up. Like I couldn't make my body move another step closer. And in my mind, I was trying to rationalize everything, and I was trying to run through every possible option and think of something safer or something better that I could do to sort of save the boat, to get through this without having to climb out on that bowsprit. And I just couldn't come up with another option. And after watching horrible montages going through my mind of the boat sinking, or me drifting for days in a life raft and help arriving too late, I just realized the only way to save the boat was to do it and to go out there. And I remember climbing, like taking a deep breath, looking up at the waves, waiting for a gap on the back of a wave. I jumped up and I climbed down on the bowsprit, and I turned around and I faced the front of the back of the boat. And it took me a second before the next wave was hitting the boat, and it would pick you up and it would toss you 30 feet down the face of this wave, where the hull would impact on the trough of the wave, and then the rest of the wave would catch up and break over the top of you, and I'd be completely engulfed in white water. And on the back end of it, I would need to let go of the rail and put my screwdriver in the fitting and use my hammer and actually try and separate that fitting from the boat. And I couldn't tell you how long I was out there for, but that was definitely a completely defining moment on saving the boat, but also battling that fear and that trauma that's associated with a moment like that in time. And I don't think
her mum might have called again.
I think
mum knows she's telling the story. We'll go back to us. I think mum knows that she's telling the story about what's going on, and she's
phone keeps going off. I'm back.
Mum's calling.
Your mum's calling again?
No, that was someone else that I have no idea who it was. But
you're just too popular. Oh, again.
Calling back.
This is hilarious. This is good.
Popular, you know.
I know.
I love it. Like literally, we are sitting on the edge of our seats where Lisa Blair her mast has snapped, and you go through all these technical things, but the reality is your mast snapped. All these big metal wires that hold a mast in place are now flipping around and are weapons of themselves. Your mast is sawing your boat in half because you're in waves. You have not even mentioned that you are in freezing, like how cold are the seas and the temperature? We're not in the Whitsundays. We're not in the Great Barrier Reef. You are in Antarctica. So how cold is the water and how cold is the air that you are facing?
Yeah, so the water was around 3 degrees and the air temperature was 6 degrees, but you've got 50 knots of wind on top of that with that wind chill factor.
Yeah,
so,
terrific.
it was just insanely cold. I
mean, so you're freezing. You are forced to do what most people pretend to do. You know, on the Titanic where, Rose goes out and she's like, and you're on that little point at the front of the bow and you're there and Jack's behind you, but this was not Lisa's reality. You were alone and you had to go out onto the bow, and you had no railing like you can see in the picture that she was showing because the railing has been snapped off, and your only chance is to go and throw yourself up against massive waves that are bucking your boat completely and to hold on in the middle of the ocean in freezing conditions to cut the bow. Is that correct? Yeah. So basically Laura Croft shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
real life Laura Croft.
That was a really at the time in the moment I was just pushing through, because you've got to save the boat, you've got to do it, you've got to face these challenges and overcome them. And it wasn't until later that I really realized the echo effect of it and how it was going to define or change my relationship with the sea moving forward. So it took me about 8 or 9 waves passing through before I was able to separate that section of the boat and scramble, and I kind of flopped back inside the rails, and I just took a beat to just gather my breath, and then I crawled inside the boat. And I don't think I've ever made a phone call that I've been so happy to make, and that was to let my shore crew know that I'd managed to save that section of the boat. And I still had, from that moment, another 2 hours in the emergency before I was actually safe enough to go below and try and self-manage now for hypothermia and self-treat for hypothermia. So,
because once you cut the bow off, you still have a hole in your boat, correct?
Still had a hole in the boat, and I still had a couple of pieces of rigging left that I had to cut free as well, the side pieces of rigging. So, so I still had to manage and deal with those. And the storm was thankfully starting to abate by the time I had managed to save the boat. And because the minute I'd separated the rigging from the boat, the mast just ripped off the boat and sank immediately. And when it sank, there was this incredible kind of calm that occurred in the middle of the storm, because I was no longer sort of attached to this giant anchor trying to stay stationary in a storm, and I was now free to actually move with the waves. And so everything got a whole lot less violent the minute I was able to actually free the rigging from the boat. And so that hole in the boat wasn't getting too much water in, and I hadn't flooded the interior of the boat yet. So I was more concerned at that point about my own ability to survive the hypothermia. So instead of dealing with the hole in the boat, I went below, and I had to strip out of all my soaking wet gear. I filled up 2 hot water bottles. I had a protein shake and a Mars bar just to get some fuel in my system. And then I spent the next sort of 6 hours just shivering uncontrollably in my bunk and just trying to get some core temperature kind of building up. I just couldn't get warm for hours after that. But yeah, I mean, I was incredibly fortunate to be here today, to be able to talk to you and share this story and sort of share my experiences with people, because that night could have gone, a million different ways. And I was just incredibly fortunate that I was able to get myself through that moment in time. But it still left me on a boat that was completely broken 1,000 nautical miles from land. So the next challenge for me was actually getting to land, and I didn't really have much time after the demasting to process the demasting. I sort of made a deal with myself. If I thought about it for too long, I just kept breaking down into tears, and just, this was 3.5 years of work that was now completely over. And now I still had to survive, and I still had to push through, but I'd lost this opportunity, the original record that I was going for. And so I'd lost all of that, that achievement that I was trying to go for. And I remember making this deal where I just said to myself, right, just take each day as it comes and focus on getting to South Africa safely and getting there alive. And then the rest I can deal with later, and I can focus on that later. And so I think there's another photo. I ended up rendezvousing with this container ship 800 miles from land to get a fuel transfer. And that's a whole nother saga and story on itself, and was probably more disheartening and traumatizing than the demasking, because it was, again, another situation that simply shouldn't have occurred. But through a series of language difficulties, this 86,000-ton container ship was trying to render me fuel and ended up drifting into the side of me. And that sort of red circle that you see that I've highlighted on that image, they kept repeating that they've got fenders out. We've got fenders, we've got fenders. Come, tie up, come closer, come closer. And their fenders were these 2 tires hanging off the side of the ship. And we're in 6-meter swell, still in 25 knots of wind in the middle of the Southern Ocean. And they're rolling so dramatically that, 1 minute their kind of fenders would be touching the water, and the next minute it would be 10 meters up in the air. And it was just this idea that they didn't understand that my boat was a fiberglass boat and it couldn't withstand an 86,000 ton steel container ship crashing down on the side of it. And so we ended up having a collision at sea and costing another $40,000 in damage to the port side of the boat as well. And after that, I managed to build a new mast using my boom that I'd been able to recover from the dismasting, and I stepped that up into a new mast, and I think that's the next image there.
Lisa,
Justin,
before you do, can I just jump in? Because at this point, how far did you have to travel to get to where this container ship was? Where is this in relation to where the dismasting happened?
Yeah, so at the time of the dismasting, the closest vessel to me was this container ship, and they were 600 miles away. And then I had to travel 200 miles north under motor, and they traveled 400 miles south, and 3 days later we intercepted.
Can I just say, it's like, I'll go back to that slide in a second. It's just such an odd, because I've seen your vessel, I've seen Climate Action now. She's a beautiful, beautiful boat, and just to see it like that, it just looks so bloody odd. I mean, like, to see no sail on a boat like that, no mast. I mean, like, it's.
And to have you, I mean, and you have just gone through a fear-based experience. That's probably one of the most extreme things that anybody could go through. Can you hear me on my mic? You're pointing.
Yeah.
Justin's pointing.
I'm just saying that you should talk to your mic, Lauren.
Okay.
And thank you.
He's fumbling my mic. And you've just been through this, and your body's just been through hypothermia, and this is hours and hours and hours of both life or death on the boat, then life or death inside of the boat to fight hypothermia after you were riding the boat to cut the mast. And now you have to go through this scenario. I mean, what was your body just on hyper alert, or was it breaking down? Do you remember how you were feeling?
I remember, because I didn't have a mast, I was motoring north, and I remember actually being able to get probably the biggest sleep I'd had in like months on the journey.
So, yay, positive.
It's the little wins.
And it was also like this kind of depression took hold as well, where I lost all the joy in it straight away. It was like, as soon as that ability to have the project and to be on this record was gone, I sort of fell in this hole afterwards. So I was just sort of monitoring everything on my instruments and spending those few days just sort of catnapping consistently and trying to rest my body. And I knew, I mean, I was covered in bruises from head to toe from the demasting, and I was just trying to let myself heal a little bit on the way up. And so by the time the container ship scenario occurred, I mean, I was rested to some extent, but I was still suffering from fairly high levels of exhaustion. And I rendezvoused with the ship at 2 a.m. and then we stood off until sunrise. And then the whole ordeal was another 12 hours of maneuvering and high stress and emotional turmoil that went around post collision and before the collision, which was just incredibly difficult to process. And I was in more hysterics around the container ship scenario because it was completely and utterly avoidable. They needed to find me a translator. That was it. I needed a translator to be able to clearly communicate with the ship. And none of that scenario should have developed or occurred in any way whatsoever. I mean, the ship was coming to help me and to aid me, and they ended up almost sinking the boat a second time in as many days and putting me into a situation where I was having to make decisions about my safety and whether I would be able to keep the boat floating again. So yeah, I mean, it was heart-wrenching and just a complete devastation a second time in just a few days. And so mentally it was, I think I was getting fairly unhinged by this point. And then I just had to keep pushing because I still was 800 miles from land. I still had to just get to South Africa, which was the closest continent to me. So yeah, it was quite a process.
What are the feelings you're feeling now? I mean, like, you're retelling this story. Do you go back there? Or I mean, like, you seem like a fairly methodical person. I mean, people on expeditions, especially on boats, you have to be. You know, you have to keep processes and systems going. Now you're back. It's been 3 years. What do you feel now? Like, do you feel frustration and anger? Do you feel that fear? Can you really feel that fear still?
I still tear up almost every time I tell it. Like, even when we've been talking, my eyes have been misting at certain points because it's something that sort of shadowed me a long time, and I actually, like, something we'll probably talk about later, I've been writing the book for it, and I've actually found the process of writing the story really healing, in the sense that it's allowed me to kind of process the story a little bit more. And I'll talk about it in the next section, but I never got a moment to actually process anything, to face it or deal with it. So it was something that just was shoved to the back of my mind, and I had to get to South Africa. I focused on getting to South Africa, built a new mast, motor sailed the boat to South Africa. And once I got to South Africa, I then wanted to finish the rest of the record, because that was the only thing that was kind of giving me hope or was making me feel alive. And so I just kept pushing forward and kept focusing on that. So I think you've got a shot there of the jury rig. So that's just coming into South Africa. Now, this was taken 10 days after the original demasting. So I demasted, 3 days after that, rendezvous with the container ship, and then 6 days after that, finally made safe landfall in Cape Town. And then once I got there, I had 2 months trying to rebuild the boat and repair the damage. And I had to find a secondhand mast that was randomly in a shed in South Africa that happened to fit my boat. And if I was going to have a shot at actually finishing the trip and just doing it with one stop, then I just had to keep kind of pressing forward. And I didn't really think at that point much about the demasting, apart from it was this horrible thing that happened that I just had to deal with at the time. And now I'm dealing with the next set of challenges. And it wasn't until I actually restarted the record and sort of started going back south that I really sort of started to feel the kind of process or the trauma associated with that. And I think if you jump another photo ahead there, Justin, so I picked this mast up for $5,000 and it had been sitting in the shed for 15 years, and it happened to fit the boat, and it was the only way that I could actually get the boat going again, because I was flat broke and had no money, and insurance, there was a complication with my insurance, so they didn't pay out all the funds. And the day I left was 2 days after the largest winter storm had hit South Africa in over 30 years. And there'd been 6 people killed, and all the streets had been flooded, and there'd been mudslides and all this stuff happening locally in South Africa out of Cape Town there. And so I left for the second part of the record on the back end of that. And again, I was still just pushing so hard to just get to the start line a second time and just keep pushing, that I hadn't really had time to process that demasting or all the scenarios that occurred there. And the day I left, I got incredibly seasick. And I think if you just click through a couple of shots here, Justin, incredibly seasick. And then I got a head cold. It's probably the worst head cold I've had in like 10 years. And I went straight out into Southern Ocean winter storms. And the storms are traveling from west to east across the bottom of the ocean. And as they're traveling across, they're more aggressive than the summer-based storms. So they were generating waves of 15 meters in size in the center of the storm, just on the forecast. So a forecast is the average wave. And they say a wave can be up to 40% higher than what's forecasted. So these waves were just enormous and were effectively impossible to sail across. And I remember spending 5 days in just hell of seasickness and head colds and battling into these seas. And I remember my relationship to storms had changed after the demasting. And while the storm that I was facing during the demasting wasn't the cause of the demasting, it just added to the risk and the challenges that I faced that night. It was still something that kind of traumatized me in a way. And when I first left for this record, once I felt that the boat was okay and that it was handling things well, I would just relax because there was nothing else I could do. Like the boat was handling it. And so if it could handle the storms, then I would stop worrying. Whereas when I went back to sea after the demasting, I remember really struggling to process my fear in the middle of these 15-meter seas because the temperature was so much colder. There was blizzards and snowstorms in the middle of the ocean. the waves were just these incredibly high walls of water, and you would just see them, and they were like mountains almost, like they were kind of this rounded shape. But the top sort of 3 or 4 meters of the wave would throw over and break, and it would give you this 2 or 3 meter high wall of white water that would come ripping down to the boat. And as you would sort of get lifted by a wave up to the crest, this wall of white water would hit you, and then it would throw you to the trough of the wave, and then it would break over the top of the boat from there. So my whole world went from happily sailing to knockdown after knockdown. I was more often than not getting knocked down to sort of 120, 130 degrees. Now, a knockdown is when the mast, which should normally be kind of upright, goes and gets slammed all the way into the water, and 90 degrees is a big knockdown. And then I was going like 120 degrees, like, or 140 degrees, like pretty well almost upside down every 20 minutes, every 30 minutes. And so every hit on the boat was just the G-forces associated with it. We would smash into the trough and everything would shudder. And I remember constantly having this sort of almost a panicky feel the entire time, where I would be having to get up and check that the mast was still there after every single knockdown, whereas before I never really had that stress or that concern associated with being in these really severe seas. And I think there's a little video there, actually, Justin, the next clip across, of a knockdown in the Southern Ocean. So this is one of the more mild ones, but it's one that I managed to capture on footage, and it just kind of goes to show the effects that are occurring as you're going underwater. And that trauma of the demasting really changed how I related to the boat, and it changed my experience with the ocean, with the seas, and with what I was capable of sort of suffering through. And after 5 days of questioning every possible decision, and I had sort of these doubters that had been emailing me, telling me not to go, that it was a suicide run, and I was still trying to process the trauma of the demasting, and it was all kind of bubbling up together into this moment where I remember being on the side of the boat, and I was trying to fix something at the piece of rigging wire on the side there, and this massive wave hit, and it engulfed the whole boat in such a way that it ripped my legs out from underneath me, and my legs were kind of over the safety railings, hanging over the ocean, and I managed to hook an elbow on a piece of wire and just hold on. And I remember just the force of the water trying to rip me off the deck of the boat there, and just thinking, I can't do it. Like I can't push past this. This is too much. And it was at that point that I realized how severe fear can be, and how monumental it can affect our decisions on a trip like that. And how I had lost my trust in the boat. I'd lost my determination or my faith that the boat could get me through all these conditions. And I'd started doubting not just my own abilities, but the boat's abilities to get me through as well. And that completely changed how I interacted with the project. And it was some smart advice from my mum that actually got me pushing through that. And she reminded me that if I was 72 days into my record and I never demasted, and I was facing conditions like this, she asked me if that would have been enough to make me quit at the time. And I remember thinking that no, there's no way I would have quit, even in these conditions, if I'd never demasted, if I'd never gone through that process. And it was that little bit of advice that allowed me to kind of reset my mindset and start looking at things from a positive angle, and trying to, instead of just trying to give in and let the storm and the ocean win, I was trying to figure out a way to actually overcome it. And how can I survive in the Southern Ocean in these conditions, and what do I need to do to keep the boat safe? And I started sort of looking forward rather than focusing on everything in the past that had sort of got me to that point. And if you click through a couple more there, Justin, so I was able to actually work out that the boat sat quite well hove to, which is that shot right there. So it means that you like put the headsail on the wrong side of the boat, and you effectively drift sideways and stall the sails out. And by doing that, you create this area of slick water to the windward side, and it means these excuse me, it means these waves coming through break on the edge of that slick rather than against the side of the boat, and it protects you. And at one point through, while I was hove to, I got smashed by a wave so large we actually went completely upside down, a full 180, and I was very thankful to come back up the same direction. But I just had to get kind of across this storm belt to the southern end of these storms, and then I'd be okay. And if you go to the next clip there, Justin, this was filmed the day I crossed back onto the racetrack of 45 degrees south and was able to turn left and start traveling with the storms. And it was my first blizzard and snowstorm at sea, and it was howling a gale, and it was just horrible cold and miserable. But I was finding at that point I'd found a happier balance between my relationship with the ocean, my trust in the boat to get me through, and the conditions that I was facing. And from there I was able to keep going, and I finally crossed the finish line in Albany some 6 weeks later, and set the record as the first woman with one stop. So I was, with everything going on, I was just incredibly happy to have been able to actually finish the journey.
I'm sorry, I'm just a bit in shock actually. Lauren, do you want to go on a sailing trip?
maybe not. Maybe somewhere a little bit sunnier.
Yeah, with Sundays. That's serious. That's a serious bit of ocean. Seriously, that's crazy. And the stories that you're telling here are almost unfathomable. Getting knocked down, knockdowns to 120, 140 degrees constantly. Being in that kind of cold conditions. You can't forget how cold the bloody water is down there, how much wind. Like, you are one of the hardest people I know. You have to be. Seriously.
Yeah, it was...
She's not disagreeing. Look at that.
Well, no, I actually am planning to go back now.
What?
For Antarctica 2.0. So it's sort of like that 3 years that I've had to process it has really allowed me to kind of try and push past those moments and sort of overcome the trauma. And I think talking about it in these sorts of scenarios and a keynote speaking scenario has really also helped me process it. And so I'm feeling kind of ready, and it's unfinished business for me, and I want to go back. So I'm aiming for the end of next year to go and do it again.
So I have to ask, this is the thing that has always just
I know it's coming.
The why. What? Okay, so we just heard, one, there's so many things I want to dive into. I want to get into this link between fear and trust, because I think that's at the crux of fear. I think the fact that you freeze is a really interesting one. The fight, flight, or freeze. I definitely resonate with the freeze, and it's very frustrating, and I can only imagine on that scale. But let's just start out with what drives you, because in the very beginning, you said you kind of seek life or death experiences. And the joy was really in the record. And when that record was broken, you couldn't achieve this thing that you had set out to do. You were really kind of lost. So what is it, the record? Is it kind of to feel alive in a life or death scenario? What is it that makes you not only want to go out there in the first place, but want to go back out there after you've just had this experience?
Yeah, it's a hard one, because there is no specific why. I haven't yet answered the question as to why I enjoy challenges like this. But I think one of the biggest things for me is when I first raced around the world with the Clipper race, I never in a million years could fathom that was something I'd be capable of doing, that I could become a circumnavigator, that was something that I would even enjoy. And then I'd done it and I loved it. And I remember asking myself at the end of that trip, okay, so we've just sailed the whole way around the world with crew. What else can we do? And I remember my kind of what's possible scenarios started getting much, much bigger. And the more I achieved with my sailing, the bigger those what's possibles would get. And along with that, the the better my skill sets would get and my ability to achieve bigger projects. And so the Antarctica kind of stemmed from that mindset, attitude of, what am I capable of? What is possible? And the more I would set out and the more I would achieve, the more these things became a possibility that I could achieve it. And so I sort of, in a way, by doing smaller projects and taking those baby steps and building up the skill set and doing things like racing around the world and raising sponsorship and all of those fun factors that go along with records, I got a better faith in my own ability to achieve something. And I started believing in my own capabilities a lot more. And that then broadened the scope of what I was capable of. And I stopped limiting myself through my mindset or my attitude or my belief systems. And things like Antarctica suddenly didn't sound so crazy to me. They didn't sound life or death, because with any records, and I'm sure you guys are fully across this with your own projects, it's down to planning and preparation. That's what makes a project succeed. And if you're not prepared correctly for it, it's never going to succeed. It doesn't matter how good a sailor you are. If you don't have the right preparation, it's not going to happen. And for me, I think the biggest sort of jarring thing around the demasting was that I had prepared everything. I'd done all the things, and I still had a scenario that occurred that shouldn't have happened. And it actually ended up being an electrical issue in the boat that caused the mast to come down, a severe case of electrolysis. Yeah. And that was just one thing that wasn't able to plan for, and that I wasn't aware of at the time. And so, yeah, this
is a really interesting one. I'm just going to dive into that, because I did hear you say, you were able to plan for 99% of it, but that 1% happened to you. The 1% where the mass came down happened to you. And the amount, book Lisa for a keynote, anyone out there, if you want to hear the full story. I mean, we went for about 45 minutes there, and that's only a portion of the story. But the amount of decisions you had to make on the fly in a very high risk situation, in a life or death situation, and how you innovated out of it. Have you, as you've digested your brain and your ability to do the impossible, as you just said, what do you think about this relationship between innovating out of the unplanned 1%?
I think it's still, for me, I still honestly believe that my preparation is what allowed me to get out through that 1% scenario. It was the fact that I had visualized a demasting. I had thought through what tools would work. I knew where they were. I had them planned in specific lockers and labeled clearly. I had discussed it with riggers. I had talked it over with sailors. I had talked through the scenario with plenty of other sailors who had already faced it themselves. And for me, it was in a scenario I never expected would occur, because I'd replaced the rigging and because I'd done all the right checks and all the right preparation. But it was always a scenario that could occur. I just didn't expect the likelihood of it was so extremely low that in my mind, I never thought I would face it. But I think also that ability of being able to pivot in these situations, because life throws curveballs at us. I mean, look at COVID-19.
Hello, COVID.
There's so many people that are having to pivot in our lives, and it's the same concept there. I mean, once I was able to save the boat, that was the reaction, and then I had to pivot and try and figure out a way to get to land safely. And how can you get a damaged boat to land with no sails and no masts and 200 liters of fuel? I mean, you build a new mast, so you have to figure out way around it, because you're stuck in a corner and
no other option. I mean, that's what you have to, you just have to do in those situations. And it's interesting because the preparation, yes, you might not have you plan for all the eventualities you can see, and something might unforeseen happen, a black swan event. But if you've got all that other shit taken care of, then you can focus your energy on fixing the problem. And you don't want to be spending your grey matter on thinking about things that would ordinarily challenge you. So preparation, is hyper important. Now, I wanted to go back to that why, because I understand why. But what I don't understand why is why Antarctica again. Is it the same trip? What is the goal? Like, near enough
yes.
is close enough? Sorry, I cut you off.
Same record.
Same
yep.
record?
So the goal is so my first record that I was going for was to also break the existing men's record, which was set by Fedor Konyakov in 2008. And he did the record in 102 days. And when I demastered, I was 24 hours ahead of his record. So I was actually beating his record at the time that the boat broke. And I think for me, whilst it was always sort of a secondary goal of mine to try and go for the speed record, and I'd always planned the project around the idea that I don't rush, I just have to do the loop and come home alive, I still had this kind of desire or idea that I wanted to go out and break that record. And so Antarctica 2.0 is a little bit around me getting closure in my ability to actually survive in this environment and do the trip I intended to do all along successfully. And I'm very well aware that there's still like that 1%, that unknown factor that could derail Antarctica 2.0. But I feel like I've learned so much from the first version of it that I have that ability to go back and finish it. And then there's also this record that I've been wanting to get, that I've been eyeing off for the last 7 years. So I feel like it's this real unfinished business, and I feel like it's still affecting my ability with my boat. So by going back, I will help process that.
So I think that that's the perfect point to say this. You know, you said fear and trust were these really close bedfellows that before you knew. Yes, John?
I'd just like to jump in before you do that, because you're getting on a tangent there.
That's a really important tangent.
It's related, but I'm just like, because Michelle Lee's asked several questions. So Michelle Lee was, I think, episode 6, and Michelle rowed across the Atlantic and is planning another epic expedition, which is a row across the Pacific Ocean. So she's said a number of things throughout the whole thing. Hi, Michelle. But she's interested, I suppose, on the concept of wanting to do it again and say, you know, is it to do it better with the lessons learned if you knew then what you know now, which is slightly confusing. But she followed it up with, would you change your gear and your systems and your equipment, or were you pretty much spot on?
Yeah, I think thanks, Michelle. Fantastic to see from you, and glad you're going on another record. I'll be watching that one.
You guys have a lot in common.
Awesome women, awesome people.
So I think it's a little bit of both. Like, there's not a whole lot in my preparation that I'd really change. I mean, I would increase my menu options so I don't get bored of the food. And I've since gone and invested in a waterproof angle grinder so I can cut the rig away quicker. But the same level of preparation will be going into the second project. And the one thing I'm super careful of with Antarctica 2.0 is just making sure that I don't go, oh, well, I've done it once, so it can't be that difficult second time around. Like, I think it'll actually be harder to go through it twice because I now know how difficult it can be. So I need to make sure that my expectations of how hard it is going to be higher, or I'm expecting it to be harder than what I'm actually facing, so that I can process that as I go along. But equipment-wise and preparation-wise, I really felt like I'd done everything possible. And there's maybe one or two things, like making sure that my angle grinder is waterproof. And I'm looking at whether it's a good idea or not to increase the wire size on the boat. But the rigging wire was already oversized by 2 sizes anyway, so it was already well over spec. So is it more dangerous to make it heavier and have all that extra weight aloft, or is it a smarter decision? So I'm still sort of in that investigation phase for that. I think also the one thing that came out of the demasting that we haven't really touched on yet is it's given me a lot more confidence in my ability to handle those scenarios. So I know if I go out another time and I hit a submerged container ship and I flood the boat, I know that I can cope with that scenario, I can manage that, and I can actually overcome it. So it's actually, whilst there's the trauma associated with it, it's actually given me that confidence as well to be able to know that I'm capable.
I love that. So
it's a nice balance.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. In you know, you just got into the technical details there of what would you do different for Antarctica, but from a higher level, you have this link with fear and trust. And you lost that trust in your boat. Like you said before, I was in these crazy storms, but I could trust that my boat was okay. And when you demasted at a point that you probably shouldn't have demasted, you lost that trust. But it's really interesting how you said, I lost that trust in the boat and I gained that trust in myself, that I can handle these unknown things, or I can handle a lot more than I ever thought I could handle. So how much of Antarctica 2.0 is regaining that trust in your boat, is overcoming that fear that still might be a bit traumatic, if anything?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a major part of wanting to do that. And even when I finished the Antarctica record and I went and sailed solo around Australia, there was like 2 weeks around the Great Australian Bight in fairly rough conditions. And I remember just consistently having that change in my relationship with the boat and that doubt factor coming through. And it really changes and impacts how you sail on especially shorthanded, because you're doing all these micro sleeps the whole way along. And so for me, I think doing the record a second time and surviving in what is known as the world's most dangerous ocean for 3 months straight and successfully completing that trip will just be like a real point of closure for me on all of that. And I think leading into it, one thing I'm really conscious of is making sure that I identify those weak points in myself, and that rationale, that relationship with my boat needs to be improved. And that's going to be coming into the preparation side of things and the sea trials and throwing the boat around in really rough conditions and just flogging her massively, so that I know by the time I leave that boat is going to be as safe and as sound as absolutely humanly possible. And then, there is always going to be that 1% that you can't plan for, that little bit of luck that has to go along with it. But at least I know I can deal with those scenarios when they come.
Can I just ask you about that that planning element, you and Justin? Because Justin has planned some amazing expeditions as well. It's something that I've always faced in my life, which is when I get scared, usually in a social circle. So I have a large fear of speaking in public, which is funny because over the last year and a half, I've become a keynote speaker on occasion. But I do that because I want to face that fear. I don't do it because I want to be a keynote speaker. I do it because if I have a story to tell, I don't want to be held back by that fear. Yeah. But I find myself freezing, even in my dreams. If I am in a fight or flight scenario, I will freeze. And I even dream about freezing and hiding in the ground or hiding underwater. So it was really interesting how you talked about that in that point of life or death, you froze. Can you give any advice, because you walked through that, can you give any advice for somebody who is listening that says, I really want to do this big thing, but I'm terrified. And when I either try to take that first step, whether that's the first step on stage or the first step to do that thing they really want to do, I freeze. Or I've gotten to the point that, it's life or death and I'm afraid I will freeze. Can you tell about what in your planning helped you step through that on reflection?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I have like a specific technique or mindset or attitude or tool that I've really drawn on for that. I think one of the biggest things for me was and I think this rolls through into that concept of maybe public speaking or fear of the ocean or sharks or whatever that fear is. I think my will to survive was greater than my fear to freeze me. And so my desire to succeed or my desire to have a positive outcome from that scenario allowed me to overcome that fear because it was greater than the fear itself. And I think with things like public speaking or other versions of fear, whether it's just the fear of getting started, one of the biggest things I would say is that your desire to achieve what you're trying to achieve, whether it's become a keynote speaker or start talking or, maybe you've always wanted to leave the country and you've always had a fear of planes or something, your desire to do what you want to do needs to be greater than the fear that you're allowing to hold you back. And I was in a very instinctual scenario where it was a reaction that took place. But once I was able to rationalize it in my mind and be like, okay, well, the only way to live is to actually like move now and cut this rigging free and save the boat. It allowed that fear to be second to the need to actually deal with the scenario, because I had to continue fighting in order to save the boat.
Is it really in that first step? Was it in when you were like, because you said, my mind was like, oh my God, my body's not moving. Was it literally just narrowing it down to take that first step and keep moving, or was it something bigger than that?
Yeah, I think it took me about 15 minutes in the initial demasting to stop shaking violently from the adrenaline and to actually start processing things from a logical standpoint. And again, this is coming back to the preparation for me. Having that preparation allowed me to go through the motions without too much thought being needed. And I think, it's a tough one, because for me, that scenario was so outside the norm of what most people face on a daily basis, but it still has a lot of parallels that carry across. Like, I mean, even going back to when I first started trying to raise sponsorship, I would always have little mini kind of anxiety attacks just picking up the phone to try and convince some stranger to answer and give me money, and sponsor me. And I would always have to like do a little pep talk to Lisa, and I'd have to like psych myself up before I could pick up the phone and cold call somebody. So that to me is a fear. Like, it was that fear of rejection or fear of someone not believing in my passion and not seeing that enough to push through. But the only way I could get the sponsorship to do what I wanted to do was to pick up that phone and call these people. So that desire to achieve the end goal was greater than my fear to allow it to win.
And that kind of goes back to your why a little bit. I mean, to Justin's point, like, what is it? And it's a confusing one to answer. I mean, Justin gets asked, why do you do these things? And I know it trips you up at times.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's a short and pithy answers, but I mean, I want to stay on that thread of that fear, freeze response and how you extract out of it. Because I think everyone's different. I think you are right though, Lisa. I think, it's if your desire and will trumps the situation that you're in, then you'll find a way around it, or you will push through it. If not, you'll allow that situation to win. Most people have a very strong survival instinct. They want to live through a situation, so that's the desire enough. But we've all got that response to either do one of those three responses, fight, flight, or freeze. And that's a physiological and a mindset makeup that comes back from hunter-gatherer days, or what type of genetics we have in it. So it just is in us. And I have found, with me at least, because I'm not the bravest guy out there, it's repetition, it's exposure, it's going out there. Because, the first time you're in a situation, you see it, and you might freeze. And if it's not a life or death situation, I find more often than not, what happens for me is I watch, and I'm learning from that moment. And I walk away and I might go, oh, geez, I should have done X, Y, Z. But the next time that situation comes up, my brain automatically goes to plan A. You develop plan A from the last time and you do it. That didn't work out, then you do it again and you do it again. So you learn to push past that freeze response. You learn to do it. That's why you expose yourself with doing the public speaking, and you keep on walking towards it. We have this awesome little fight before we do it. It's the same pattern each time, but she always walks through it and is better every single time. So it's that constant exposure. I think exposure therapy is the best thing.
Yeah, and I also think just taking that one scenario of the dismasting and the multiple times I froze through that scenario, they were different mini scenarios that were occurring within the greater scenario. So each time a new mini scenario came up, I had to then deal with that, process that, and then try and push past that, and then the new mini scenario would occur. And I think back to your point, Justin, on the exposure point, being in that emergency for over 4 hours, I was exposed, and I had already been able to overcome one version of freezing. So therefore, the second or third time was possible to overcome them, and I just had to kind of work through it. But one of the biggest things is just trying to think logically through that scenario. And maybe Lauren, back to you at the keynote speaking, is we know you've done it. Like, you've done it so many times now. So in your mind, in theory, it shouldn't be something scary anymore, because it's something that you know you can overcome and you know you can achieve. So in my mind, that would, in theory, help you actually get going the next time you're faced with that scenario and overcome that kind of bump in the road. And that is, that's that exposure point.
And I definitely still feel it, but it's something that it does get a little bit easier, but it's not always easy. And just back to you, Lisa, when you demasted and you learned, like, I loved your idea of self-rescue. You know, you knew you had to self-rescue. And you also said at the very beginning was, you know, experience is very different than reading the book. So you had visualized the worst case scenario, but after you actually had experienced the worst case scenario, when you got back, have you done anything, you know, have you had the courage to do something that you never thought that you could do because you had gone through this extreme life or death thing that you can think of? Has it made other things easier to do that before you were like, oh, I don't know if I could do that?
Yeah, definitely. I think
Story.
There's a mini story. So when I first came up with the idea of Antarctica, and it was this idea that another sailor had thrown at me, and I initially poo-pooed it, and I was like, nope, can't do that. That's too dangerous, too scary. And then over months, like, the idea just stuck, and I really wanted to do it. And over that next 3.5 years of planning for it and trying to raise the sponsorship and everything, so many people would say to me, why don't you sail around somewhere warm? Why don't you go somewhere tropical? Why don't you do a circumnavigation of Australia first? That's got to be easier, right? And at that time, I'd actually looked at the Australia record, and I deemed it more dangerous and more difficult than sailing around Antarctica. And Antarctica is this amazing ocean, and it has these incredible swells and these incredible storms. But if your boat is set and prepared for the storms, there's very little hazards around that. Obviously the old iceberg, but I was getting forecasting on that, so that wasn't such a problem.
No biggie. If the Titanic hit it, I definitely wouldn't.
Yeah. But Australia was this, you're constantly on a knife edge sailing around Australia, because you've got, 15,000 ships operating around you at any one time. You've got the little dudes go out in their fishing tinnies, and they're in this little half cabin fiberglass boat on a calm day, and they're 10 mile out to sea with no radar reflector. You can't see them. So as a solo sailor, I still have to keep a good lookout. So I'm sleeping 10 to 15 minute micro sleeps for 58 days straight. And then you've got changing weather patterns. You've got reef, you've got rocks. You sleep through your alarm once and you're on a beach. And so to me, that challenge was always more challenging and more difficult, and was going to push me much harder than Antarctica did. And I still think it did. I think the demasting, taking that scenario of the demasting out of the Antarctica record, then Antarctica was a simpler, cleaner journey than around Australia. And I think by completing the Antarctica record and surviving the demasting and having that process, it really allowed me to go and set this record around Australia. And that was that was me stepping up the bar another level.
I love Justin and I talk about this a lot, the concept of in our joint keynote, turning the impossible to possible. And it is just one of those mindsets. And to be honest, I think we went out to the Outback because parenting felt very impossible in that first big life shift. I mean, I'm not kidding you. We didn't do it because we were sailing through parenthood. We did it because it felt impossible, and we wanted to see what was possible in this new phase of life. So I love that. I mean, I think that is really interesting how, once you shift that mindset in true experiences, and whether that's small, I mean, you started off sailing in a way that anybody could. You we're just crewing on ships.
Toilets and feeding the crew, and that was it.
And then you decided to take the next little step. I love it how you go, you just start small. And, when I sailed around the world, that was just a small step. But I mean, it is amazing how just this little mind shift set is, each step kind of is a bit of a snowball effect and can lead to the next and the next and the next.
And I also think, doing podcasts like what you're setting up today, these sorts of opportunities for other people are so valuable, because I remember when I was first trying to raise the money for the Clipper Round the World Yacht Race, and I remember the first look into that. And this was something that no one in my family had ever done. We'd never done sponsorship. Like, it just wasn't a thing that we even considered. And I remember Jessica Watson finishing her record at the time. And I remember thinking, hey, there's this 16-year-old girl who's got this money. She's got a boat. She's sailed the whole way around the world. And I'm trying to do it with crew. Surely it's possible. And so from me watching her journey, it shifted my mindset. And so hopefully, like, through you interviewing people like me and others in this journey, that you're able to actually create that influence for other people out of it, which I think is a really cool thing and a really nice way of sort of giving back to the community.
If you don't know Jessica Watson, she was actually on the podcast episode,
I think 3 episodes ago.
Let me look.
Yeah.
I'll get back to you. Justin, take it away.
I was just going to say, there's a lot of parallels with this conversation today. I mean, like, you're spot on. Like, the whole point of this is to dive into the minds of people that have seen and done some pretty crazy things, you know, face fear down, or, you know, like you have, or had the audacity to go off and do a trip around the world when you're 16 years old and no one says you can, or everyone says you can't, I should say. But there's a lot of lessons in these sessions, and one that is very closely related to this is actually episode 8. Which is Jeff Wilson talking about resilience. So it's a cracker of an episode, and he talks about hormesis and your moments of your windows of opportunity of when you can grow. But what we're talking about, you know, this exposure therapy, this to keynote speaking, to whatever it is, it's a hormetic effect. It's you're exposing yourself to something that you don't really like, or you're not comfortable in, and it forces you to push forward and grow.
And I think it is really it is important for everybody individually to identify that why, you know, where the will is bigger than the fear. And for me, being a keynote speaker is definitely not the reason. It's never something that I wanted to do, but making sure that I could speak up when necessary and use my voice is the thing that drove me to be able to start small in that arena, because I didn't want to, I guess, shy away from being able to do that. It was pushing my own personal boundaries of discomfort that was my will within that. And I think clarifying that everybody has their own reason why, and it's not always intellectual. Sometimes it's just, I felt it. I felt that I needed to go, and listening to that feeling is equally important. The Jessica Watson episode is number 9 for anybody who's watching and wants to flick back on Adventure Thinking Live, and she's a pretty amazing human as well. I'm just conscious of time.
How are you going for time, Lisa?
I'm good.
Because it's 1:30. These ones just keep, there's so many nuggets of wisdom. Do you want me to do a little bit of wrap up from what you heard? Do you have some questions that are coming through?
There's a couple of questions that I'll jump into. I mean, there's one that came up a bit was actually the what's next? You've kind of answered that, but you've also hinted at some other things, like, to me as well. You know, you're not necessarily going to just stay just in the sailing world. You might do other things in the future, because I don't feel like you're a one-trick pony.
No, and I definitely have a little bit of a list developing, much to my mother's terror. Whether I actually achieve all of the things on that list remains to be seen. But I think for me, one of the things I get personally out of doing these trips is I grow as a person. I become stronger. I get more resilient. I get more confidence in my own ability to achieve things. And so for me, I want to continue doing other adventures and pushing myself and getting outside my comfort zone and trying challenges that aren't necessarily in my specialty field of sailing, because I want to continue to have that growth personally. And like, you know, solo sailing for me was, how do I step up from sailing around the world with crew, do it on my own? So that was where solo sailing came in. And so, yeah, I definitely, like, you know, I'd love to sail solo around the Arctic. I'd like to do some ocean rowing. Antarctica, like, actually go and see the continent. Maybe hike Antarctica would be like a pretty amazing project. So I'll be calling you, Justin. So I can't see it stopping at the moment. I definitely feel like I want to continue this adventure lifestyle for at least another 10 years. And then who knows, I might try another adventure, and I might try and start a family, or, you know, try something like that in the future. So, you know, they're all different challenges, and this is just what I'm finding is helping me grow, and other people find this kind of level of growth through family or friends, or, you know, different scenarios and different goals. But it's just, I just take it to the extreme.
But now that now that your view of what's possible is expanded, the list expands, which is really exciting to watch.
I mean, adventure is an activity with an unknown. Adventure is an activity with an unknown outcome, and no one can tell you what your adventure is going to be. So, I mean, like for some people, they're listening to this, going, you know what, Arctic Ocean, Antarctic Ocean, Southern Ocean, I don't want to be in anything that cold, that's not my cup of tea. That's completely fine, Their idea might be running across the Sahara Desert or running across Africa or doing something like that. And I'm like, that number of Ks on my knee, I don't think I'd want to do that. So it's different strokes for different folks.
The biggest thing I've learned about everything as well is that it's a mindset. It's a complete mental attitude to how you embrace or live your life that allows you to go and do projects like this. And for me, that's just my version of goal setting, but someone else's version of goal setting could be owning their own home for the first time or starting their own business. And they're all exactly the same scale of goals. They're things that they haven't done before, and they're going to grow as a person while they go through that process. And, this is just my version of goals, but you can really achieve anything you want. You've just got to want it enough and figure out a way to make it happen.
So are you experience hunting? Like you want all these little experiences and different sort of memories to cherish and hold on to? Are you addicted to the feeling of being out there and isolated and by yourself, addicted to the adventure? Or, because it's like we've taken is it the red or the blue pill that Morpheus gives Neo? Like we've taken that, and it's so hard. You can't go back. You cannot go back. It's so hard.
Yeah.
What is it that you're addicted to? Is it that growth? Is it the experiences? Is it FOMO? For me, it's a bit of FOMO. Sum it up in a sentence.
I'm my best self when I'm working on projects. So I feel like I'm the happiest. I'm focused. I'm determined. I'm embracing every opportunity that's presented. So I feel like I'm my best self when I'm out on projects. So I think that's more than anything what drives me.
That's a
I'm going to slow clap that. That's brilliant. That's amazing. I got a couple more questions.
I
got a couple of more questions. I have to ask. Sorry. You said there was a part when you were telling that story, and you talked about the fact that you'd made the choice and the decision to do this trip, and you were happy with the consequences, the ultimate consequence of that 1% happening potentially, and not coming back from it. You'd made that choice. You were happy with that.
I can't say happy is the right word
but
there. Yeah, I'd acknowledge that was a risk, that was a potential outcome for the journey. But I also acknowledged that if I didn't do the journey, I would be living a half life. I would be living this minuscule version of what I could be achieving.
How are your family? Oh, I just want to talk about family for a second here, because I've battled, in particular with my mum. Like she's really hated the stuff that I've done. So I want to talk about what's that situation like for you.
Yeah, well, initially they all thought I was crazy, which is, self-explanatory.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing for my family was that I really tried to include them in everything. So I would talk to my mum and my sister and my dad about, the preparations on the boat and the equipment that was going into the boat and the level of thought that went into the process. And I think that really helped to some extent for them to actually watch me go on the journey, because they knew, that I'd done everything possible, that I wasn't willy-nilly in it, that I wasn't just waking up one day and going, yep, let's go sail around Antarctica. Like, that sounds like a great idea. It was this thing that I'd really put a lot of preparation and planning into, and I brought them along for that. In saying that, my mum was still kind of pretty anti the idea, but I rationalized her to jumping on board. And my sister was saying to my mum one time, she told me the story not that long ago, actually. She said, she's going to do it anyway. At least we can be a part. Like, let's help her, not hinder her. Like, she's going to do it. And at least we can be a part of that journey with her, or we can see her off and not be a part of it. So I think they don't really want me to go back again, but they also understand that I've got the skill set to meet the challenges. There is always that unknown element, but I think my mum said it best, actually. She said, at least I'm not a crack addict. There could be worse that I was addicted to, so I'm out living my life. I'm achieving my dreams every day, and I'm not restricting my ability to achieve goals that I'm wanting to go and focus on. And I could be in a car accident next week, or I could be getting cancer, or any number of things that are unknown factors in our life. And for me, this is my chosen path. And they've managed to come around and jump on and support me.
Yeah, for anyone who is contemplating an adventure out there, I mean, it's 100% the case. Your families are generally not going to love what you some of these things that you choose to do, but it's chasing the dream, doing the preparation and planning, making sure you cover all the cross all the T's, dot all the I's, because ultimately that's what brings a lot of people around. So that's something that's really powerful, something that happened for me as well. And also you touched on something, anyone who's interested, episode 10, Brando Yelovich talks about reintegration. He dealt with sort of an addiction to adventure. And sort of like, and so when he got back to it, it was like after his last trip, which was a cycle right across Australia through all its deserts, he was like, no, I'm not going to throw myself into the next project. I need to learn how to be happy with myself because I'm addicted to adventure. So that was a really interesting chat. It was something that I think a lot of people who have this mindset can relate to. But I have a question I've got to ask. It's from Nick Spencer, and he sails, and he is also he teaches sailing as well. I think to mainly to kids, and I know you teach people how to sail as well, Lisa. And his question was, how can I encourage my young Opti sailors to persevere during multi-day regattas?
It's an interesting one, because sailing is something that's a passion sport. So if you want to go out and suffer in the cold and like battle the wind, so to speak, it's that sense of achievement you get at the end of it that drives you to go through and face those challenges. So they have to have something that they're getting that sense of achievement from. Even if they're last in line on the regatta, they've got to stop looking at it from a regatta point of being first across the line and start following the journey maybe. So it's a tough one, because I don't know the kids, and kids are so different in how they process and how they relate to things, and certain kids deal really well with those scenarios and others aren't so interested in that, and they just doing it because they're kind of told to do it. So but the biggest thing I'd say is just make sure it's fun for them, that they're excited and they're having fun, then they're gonna want to continue doing it.
So I'm reading in that it's the ones that are passionate about it, keep them in it. The ones that aren't, just let them do what they wish. Something else might be their cup of tea, because they're definitely not going to be the ones that are going to be in the Southern Ocean sailing around Antarctica. We will do Lauren's conclusion now, but Michelle Lee has asked, can we get Victor Vescovo on an episode? That would be utterly amazing. I know a couple of people that know him, but he's a super, super busy, hard guy to get. So Michelle, we will try. And Michelle says, thank you, Lisa. Basically, this has been awesome, and she's loved it today. So Lauren, can you take it away with one of your amazing wrap-ups, and then we'll follow up with the final question.
Don't oversell it. You have to keep expectations
low.
The
terrible summary that we can't
I think more than anything, Lisa, thank you for just your storytelling. It in that moment of, you always take me to the moment. It's like I'm with you. So it's fun to connect to that in this time when we're all feeling a bit disconnected and we're all feeling a bit of wanderlust. So thank you for that. I enjoyed hearing that story, and connect to Lisa on, I know that you do some keynotes, and follow her on Instagram, which we'll put all these links up. Her Instagram handle is on the screen as well, because she oftentimes does public talks. So if you can snag to hear one of those, it would be really great. But I think that the big thing is, we talked a lot about that drive and that why, and it's not always probably easy to put into words, but I think we really got to the point that the will and the drive are the thing that will push you past that fear when it gets really hard. If you do not have that will and that drive and that clear why, then it will be very hard to kind of jump past that challenge, that whatever that challenge is that we will all face. I think that it was interesting where you said that you really focused on this idea of self-rescue as a hurdle for the fear. So it goes to the point of planning. And I think a lot of our conversation today has been around planning. You can't plan for everything, but you can make a great plan, and you can run through every scenario. And then when the unexpected happens, it allows you to handle that in the best way possible. And you aren't always going to be able to plan for everything. Like you said, experience far exceeds what you read in a book, and being out there, having that experience and to be able to rely on either your team or your boat or yourself is a huge element of doing these expeditions, getting out of your comfort zone, and really turning that possible into that impossible into the possible. And really around mindset, when you are in that point of fight, flight, or freeze, it's about going back to that preparation. So I think it really is in the planning, even planning for things like COVID, that we never, yes, there was a potential that something like this could hit the world, but how could we have anticipated that this would be? So you couldn't, Justin and I are looking at, we had to move to America and now we're moving to Tasmania. The outcome of that is very different, but actually the plan is the same. The plan was to have time with family, have some different experiences, and expand our career opportunities. And oddly, the destination is very different, but the plan is actually the same. So I think back to that planning, get those experiences in, because experiences over reading is totally different. There was another one. Oh gosh. Oh yeah. This really interesting, link between fear and trust. And in that moment when things do not go to plan, really, trusting in yourself, I think, is something that you can build on repetition. So Justin was saying this immersion therapy, and kind of you are saying this because you're going back for Antarctica 2.0, really pushing this boundary between fear and raising the bar of trust will help you be able to step through the fear when it does come up. So I thought that was really interesting. And Lisa, I think we got down to your why, and what drives you is finding your best self and finding your best why, and that the journey is not necessarily, it's all about the journey and the destination. So thank you, Lisa, for living your best life and showing others that is a goal worth aspiring to, and kind of striving to your best self, because I think we all need to do that in this day and age. And I know also we didn't talk about this, but if you want to put a plug, your boat is called Climate Action Now. And you are driven by the fact that the world is changing. Is there anything you want to say that you are hoping to be your best self to make some sort of change in the way that the world is going?
Yeah, I think like when I first sailed around the world with the Clipper race, when we went up through Indonesia and the likes, it was like a soup in the ocean with the amount of plastic and debris in the water. And we had to have someone standing on the bow of the boat with a pole to push the rubbish out of the way of the boat to cross an ocean. And that to me was just disgusting. And then we had the Southern Ocean section of that voyage, and there was a styrofoam box floating on the surface of the ocean with a bird sitting on it. And I just remember feeling complete heartbreak that in the Southern Ocean, thousands and thousands and thousands of miles from land, in the middle of nowhere, we have this human impact occurring and changing nature all the way out there. And so for me, I wanted to utilize the media platforms on these projects to actually create awareness and run an interactive campaign with the public. So I collect Post-it note messages from everyone that I meet and everywhere that I go, and each Post-it note is an environmental action that person is already doing towards a better future. And if you see some of the photos of my boat, it's hugely colourful on the hull. And that's because it's wrapped in thousands and thousands of these messages from the public. So the trip became less about a single girl on a boat sailing around Antarctica or around Australia, and more about me being able to carry this voice or this message for the public and hopefully inspire other people and show people that as an individual, you have the power to create change. It starts with one simple thing. Start with one change. Take a keep cup to work, or say no to plastic bags, and then build on that from there until you've created change and created action. And it's one of those things, I kind of liken it to a smile. It's a bit contagious. You start having a positive action, and then everyone else has this kind of happy roll-on effect that occurs from it. So yeah, that's the reason for the name of the boat, and I'm super proud of it. And we've touched millions of people, and hopefully I can keep spreading the word.
It's super cool. I was just posted up on screen. There's a copy of some of the Post-it notes there, and people have written, conserve and share. That's Nick from WA. Climate action for koala habitats. That's Max from Queensland. We only use one small fuel-efficient vehicle, and that's Johannes, I think, from Queensland. So it's beautiful, and that's all over the bow of your boat. It's
the whole
sorry,
boat.
yeah. I mean, yeah.
And
Sorry,
book,
Lauren's disappeared, but there's you and Dick, I think, pouring champagne on climate action now.
Climate Action Now, the new name. And even with the book that's coming out, the inside cover of the book is all Post-it note prints. So we tried to squeeze as many new messages on there as possible, and really trying to have that kind of ability to spread that word in a really positive sense as well. I think there's so much negativity around that conversation and the words climate action. So I'm really trying to impart an empowering, positive sort of encouragement with it.
Okay.
Rather than focusing on the negatives. So
it's so important. You know that's something very close to my heart. But I think that the key takeaway for that everybody can take with them this week is small actions and small steps make big impact. So whatever those are, I think, to you, just do them because they do have a big impact and a roll-on effect.
And your book, you sent it off to the publishers last week, so it's going to get printed.
You said last week.
Tuesday last week. So Christmas is coming up. It's going to be done by Christmas. Yes. How do people get a copy? What's
pre-order
in November?
Australia-wide.
Australian Geographic.
Yep.
I've been writing it for 2 years, and I think a big chunk, and I talk about it in the book, is that process that I had to go through mentally to deal with these challenges. The book hits bookshelves across Australia 1st of November, but people are welcome to order a copy off the website now, and they can pre-order. And it's a signed copy for any pre-ordered copies, and then we'll post them out to you last week of October, so you'll get them just ahead of the rest of the world. And super excited, and I'm actually really happy with how the story developed, because I almost failed English in school. Like, I can't spell to save my life. I can hardly read, and all of these problems that were associated with it, but I really feel like I've done justice to the story in the writing of the book. So I think you guys will really love it.
No, I cannot wait, and I cannot wait because I love film. Your documentary is coming out soon as well, because that teaser looks insane.
Ice Maiden, love it. Yeah, so if you
working on that for like 2 years.
And so when is that one? When is Ice Maiden coming out, or is it already out?
We don't have a fixed release date yet. We've got 2 more filming sessions for some reenactments around it, where I didn't quite have enough onboard footage, and then they're wrapping it up. So it's going to be finished by the end of the year, and then they have to sell it to a broadcast station. So sign up for my newsletter on my website, keep an update that way, or on social media, and just keep your ears out. But yeah, it should be out early next year, hopefully.
If you need people to help watch it, to give you some critical feedback, give us a holler, because I'm desperate to watch it. I really am. I think it's going to be utterly awesome. So
and pre-order the book, because that helps.
And the book is actually called...
What's the book called?
Facing Fear.
Facing Fear. Convenient. Okay, so that's going to wrap up a conversation, but we're going to ask one final question. Lauren, what is it? You don't remember? We ask this every week. We ask this question every week.
So adventure thinking is a mindset. Just like you said, it really is a mindset, and that is adventure thinking. Adventure thinking is how do we basically unlock human curiosity to achieve the impossible. So who do you think, Lisa, who has inspired you? Who do you think is an adventure thinker out there that people would benefit from hearing their story and having a chat with?
I actually pre-prepared this one, but I wanted to really think about hearing from Tim Jarvis. Like, he has done so many incredible adventure things, but he's also a real climate activist as well. And I think a lot of adventurers become passionate about our environment because we see it in the most raw form continuously. So we become advocates for our Earth. And so, I think he would be a really interesting person to talk to. He's done so many incredible polar expeditions and mountain climbs. And so I would highly recommend Tim Jarvis.
Okay, well, let's get him on. I've communicated with him in the past, and I know people that know him, so let's get him on, because he's phenomenal. He's awesome. Super cool from an adventure perspective, and from, as you said,
and I'd love to hear from the sustainability standpoint for sure. Cool.
Yeah, and he's got that aura about him, doesn't he? You know, that he's that kind of the yesteryear, and there's very few people that have the yesteryear aura of just like, the old.
What the yesteryear aura is.
Kind of think like your stoic kind of like British explorer back in the day, kind of thing. I think that's, yeah.
Sort also been adventuring for like 20 plus years. So he's
more, isn't he? Surely, yeah.
Consistently adventuring, and he hasn't found a point where he's stopped yet. So I think that's like quite an interesting aspect of his journey. A lot of other people do 1 or 2 big trips and then move on with their life, and he's like built his entire life around a sense of adventure. So I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah.
How do we build a life of adventure?
We might pull you in and we'll just talk about how to make this more sustainable, like a career in adventure. And it can just be like a private mentoring session. Sweet. All right. Well, Lisa, we'll let you go, but if you could just hold just whilst we just wrap up, and then we'll say goodbye to you properly offline.
Thank you, Lisa Blair.
Lisa Blair, thank you so much. It's been epic.
And what's your website? We will put it on the show notes, but can you tell us your website for people
that are... It's on the
are...
screen right now.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Right at the bottom.
LisaBlairSalesTheWorld.com for those who are listening and are not watching.
This is not some sort of 2-bit rodeo, Lauren. Come on.
It kind of is.
All right, Lisa, we'll talk to you in a sec. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Gang, that was it's just Lauren. Yeah, that was epic. That was really cool.
She's an amazing storyteller.
Phenomenal.
So I can't wait for her book and her documentary, and
Get it.
her book dives into fear. So if this is a teaser and this is something that you want to hear more about, definitely pre-order on our website.
Yeah. Look, we really appreciate the support. Thank you for the messages that we do get about this, and running into random people. Ran into one of our neighbours actually in our neighbourhood that was stopped me and said, loving your show, and like I didn't know from bar soap, and her father.
We don't know if anyone's listening sometimes.
Her father over in New Zealand forwarded this onto her, I should say, and said have a listen, and so that's kind of cool that it's getting around a little bit. But we are going to be turning it into a podcast. Proper podcast fairly soon, so it'll be on Spotify, Apple, and all that jazz fairly soon.
Hopefully, if you have we have a connection with Spotify, but if anybody out there is liking this content and wants to connect us to create an original series out of this, because it is a bit unique and it's heroing Australian thinkers, adventurers, amazing humans, and then
Worldwide
more
thinkers,
broadly
actually.
Worldwide, but it definitely has the Australian flair. That would be great to have that connection and to get your feedback. Are you liking it? What else do you want to see? Do we suck? Let us know. Be nice. Obviously, big hugs. Keep it kind.
Keep it kind, people. All right, well, thank you so much. We'll bow out now. And until then, happy adventuring. See you later.